Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of History Quest. I'm your host, Brian Haynes, and today I have for you 3 stories as well as some museum news. This first story, of course, is about the flood in Hutchinson in 1965 when water and ice flew over the dam and really devastated parts of the town. Great story. Why don't we get right to it? Springtime is always a favorite time of year in Minnesota. The long winter is at an end, the sun shines high in the sky, and the copious amount of snow that accumulated through winter slowly melts away and uncovers the earth. For all that splendor and forward optimism of the season, however, there is always Mother Nature in the background, watching and thinking, not yet. As a longtime Minnesotan knows, for every pleasant spring day, there is a not-so-pleasant day looming around the corner. It may come in the form of torrential winds or a perilous snowstorm, the latter causing problems twice as it melts as well. As the old proverb goes, spring comes in like a lamb and out like a lion, or vice versa. The spring of 1965 was much like any other spring. It was typical, but only in the way that it was unpredictable. As the calendar turned the page from February to March, people across McLeod County looked forward to the end of winter and the beginning of warmer months. As luck would have it, though, 2 late winter snowstorms dumped substantial amounts of snow atop an already present snow cover. To make matters worse, heavy spring rains dumped an overabundance of water into the region. As March turned to April, there was concern across much of the state that snow conditions of March would literally spill over into April. The amount of melting snowpack, aided by heavy rains, was sure to cause flooding across the region. Sure enough, rivers in the region began to swell up over their banks. By Saturday, April 10th, concerns began to grow in Hutchinson, Minnesota, as water from the overflowing river blocked Main Street Bridge. The river kept rising. By Monday, April 12th, the Crow River reached its flood crest right about supper time. Volunteers from all over swarmed into Hutchinson to aid in holding back the rising waters. City crews and the fire department were the first on the scene, but soon residents from all over the community came together to aid in filling sandbags and breaking up ice dams. Soon, the Civil Air Patrol, area businessmen, farmers, wives, city council members, church groups, teachers, and even DNR officials were on the scene as well to aid in any way that they could. The river reached an all-time high water reading level of 5.75 feet over the top of the dam. Meanwhile, in Glencoe, the people there were facing their own rising water in Buffalo Creek. It was reported that some places were seeing water levels reach depths of 3 feet. Soon, sandbaggers were working heavily near the Buffalo Creek Creamery to save the building from the rising waters. With sewers backing up around town, it was decided to dynamite a portion of County Road 75 near the Glencoe Catholic Cemetery. This was done hoping that it would speed up the flow of moving water. About 7:30 p.m., while many people were settling down after supper, a tremendous blast literally rocked the earth. The blast left people in a state of bewilderment. Homes in the area were damaged, windows were broken, and lighting fixtures were twisted. Unfortunately, the blast did little to aid in the situation, and the city sent a backhoe operator out to dig a trench to let the water flow. The high water levels in Buffalo Creek began to drop about an inch per hour. Back in Hutchinson, a large ice dam was threatening to block the flow of water over top of the Hutchinson Dam. A drag line and men manning pike poles worked feverishly to keep the snow and ice from flowing over the dam so it would not damage the bridge or the dam itself. Volunteers were aided by National Guardsmen who guarded the dikes and controlled traffic around the affected areas. By midweek, the worst of the flooding was beginning to pass. On Saturday, April 17th, Main Street Bridge was reopened. The end of the flood was in sight. Yet the aftermath of the rising waters would rage on for weeks and months. Some families were forced to evacuate their homes and had to deal with major flood damage once they returned. Many businesses suffered damage as water poured into basements. One young volunteer, who had been feverishly helping to fill sandbags, walked into flood headquarters exhausted from his work and plopped down on one of the chairs. He didn't have much to say other than, "I've just filled my last sandbag." The flood was a dangerous situation, and one that will be remembered for many years to come. Yet that young volunteer's words about sum up the entire situation, as a greater catastrophe was averted by people doing what they needed to do, not for glory, not for self-satisfaction, but to save the community they called home. That actually is one of my favorite stories of McLeod County history. Part of it that I didn't put in there, but that I'll just talk about real quick. Let me back up a little bit. I've had a lot of people call in and share their stories that they had about that flood, because a lot of people that are alive today were still alive then. They may have been parents or even little kids at the time. And one of the stories I've heard from a couple of people was part of the reason that the dam overflowed was because some dynamite was set off just downriver a little bit to break up an ice dam, and it broke it up, of course, but it just sent like a rush of water in that started flowing over the dam and flooded out part of the town. But at any rate, it's a great story, one that evokes a lot of memories from people around town here, and one I think that even if you didn't grow up at that time or weren't around here at that time, if you're from Minnesota, you can easily relate to a little bit of flooding coming from the snow melt and the rains in springtime. But at any rate, the next story I have is about the first days in Glencoe. A while back I had written a story in the Leader, and I even talked about it on the show last month, and it was of the Hutchinson brothers and on their trip to Hutchinson and how they spent their first days. And I thought, why not do one about Glencoe too? Of course, the Hutchinson brothers were famous and make a great story, but when it comes to Glencoe, there's another famous figure there who regionally was just as, if not even more famous than the Hutchinson brothers, and that is, of course, Martin McLeod, who played a huge role in the early days of Minnesota. So at any rate, I wanted to talk about this story, or tell this story too, of McLeod and his party that he was leading coming into Glencoe. Great story, so sit back and enjoy. It was the early morning dawn of the 17th of May in 1855. Across the countryside, wildlife awakened with the morning sun. Songbirds sang, ducks called loudly in the marshes, and meadowlarks played their flute-like tunes across the open prairie. It would have been a sight to see, an entire wilderness coming to life as the sun crested the eastern horizon. Among the great arising that morning was a party of 6 men silhouetted by the rising sun as they trekked west into the vast frontier region of Minnesota's interior. They were headed for a place called 9 Mile Creek, where their guide, Martin McLeod, would join them. McLeod's vast knowledge of the land west of St. Anthony was an attribute to not only the men who followed him, but to the entire movement of westward expansion. For several years he worked in the fur trade and gained a substantial understanding of what lay beyond the edge of civilization in Minnesota. For 3 days, the party of 7 men trudged through the big woods of Minnesota, and unlike the expedition which came after, these men had little in the way of a trail to follow and had to blaze their own. Brush was cleared, trees were felled, and a path was paved. On the evening of the 20th, they camped by a lake and felt as though they were being stalked by wild predators. One of the men in the party, Colonel John Stevens, remarked, "Wild animals prowled around us all night long," in consequence of which Mr. McLeod called the place of our discomfort Tiger Lake, a name that it still bears today. The following day, May 21st, the party came into an Indian trail that led through the woods and out onto an open swath of prairie. Stevens later remarked, "From the foliage overhead, trembling in the breeze, with glimpses of blue sky beyond, we stood with uncovered heads, enchanted by our first view of the lonely and lovely wilderness." The group continued their trek southwest until they came to the place McLeod intended to lead them. Here was a place with ample farmland, timber for building, and a freshwater stream called Buffalo Creek. The first day in the settlement was short-lived. The group explored their surroundings and examined the countryside. The following day, they found themselves back on the trail, heading east to Minneapolis to plan a more permanent trek with extra manpower for laying out the foundation of the town they were about to create. On June 11th, a slightly larger party than the original explorers arrived at the site and immediately began operations. A detail was selected from the original party to go out and do the rough work, as they called it. The men saw their new settlement as sort of a colony in the West, a picket or post, or a great army of development and civilization, as Colonel Stevens called it. Two of the men, Andrew Bell and William Chapman, began erecting 2 small cabins immediately after the town site was surveyed. Chapman wished to be the first man to drive a plow into the virgin soil and did so on that same day. During the first few weeks, as cabins were still being erected, the party slept beneath their covered wagons. Discomforts were many, especially the attacks of vicious mosquitoes that swarmed the men and animals as they worked and slept. McLeod, feeling there was a resemblance between the valley of Buffalo Creek and his ancestral homeland in Scotland, petitioned for the settlement to be named Glencoe. The others found it pleasing and agreed. During those first few months in the settlement, progress was slow. Though timber abounded in the region, cut lumber and other building materials were scarce. It would be 1 year later before 2 of the original settlers put up a sawmill. The mill would not be put into operation until August of 1856, however. The mill was symbolic, as it was the first mill built west of the Big Woods region. It was also the first industrial business trade of the settlement and provided a sort of representation of progress and civilization on the frontier. With conviction, one could safely say that the mill, along with the foundation laid by the settlers, meant Glencoe was now on the map. So, like I said, that's the story of McLeod and his party coming into Glencoe and creating Glencoe. It's always interesting to me that Glencoe was actually, it was a campsite prior to it ever becoming a town. There's a Dakota man, his name was John Otherday, and he had his small band that followed him around. And an interesting story about John Otherday, he was actually considered one of the fiercest warriors that the Dakota had. There was another Dakota warrior who they said was just as fierce. And the two, I don't remember what this other guy's actual name was, but at any rate, the 2 of them got into a scuffle, and John Otherday bit this other guy in the nose and actually tore a chunk out of it. And from then on, he was called Cut Nose. But anyway, not about this story, but John Otherday would lead his people on to Buffalo Creek and camp out in this spot, likely, hunting expeditions or what have you. It was never like an actual permanent campsite or anything like that, but they would travel and they would camp on this site. Well, of course, Martin McLeod, he had worked in the fur trade and was all over Minnesota, and one of the things he would do was travel from village to village to village, and these are Dakota, Native American villages, and he would travel around these villages and take orders for supplies that they might need, and get those supplies sent to them back from Fort Snelling or wherever they were coming from. Supplies like ammunition, powder, blankets, pots, anything like that that the tribes would need. And then in turn, of course, he would take those furs or have those furs taken back, and kind of tell them, I suppose, like a go-between. This is the going rate. We expect this kind of fur to be worth whatever, or maybe this year we expect the top priority to be beaver furs or doe skin fur or something like that. But at any rate, so he already knew of this site because of the Native Americans having a presence there earlier. So it's just kind of neat, and that he had this running knowledge of the land that was kind of laid on top of almost infrastructure that was already there by the Dakotas. But at any rate, great story. I do love telling it. This next story is just kind of about music in McLeod County. Maybe the younger folks out there maybe don't realize this, but the more wise among you probably do, that polka music, or old-time music, as a lot of people like to refer to it, has a huge history in McLeod County, has been very, very popular throughout the years. There's some big-name musicians that have come out. You have Lester Schuft, who is an award-winning musician from the area, has put out several albums, and of course Wally Pickle. And then, if you've been down to the museum, we have that great big Whoopie John display from Vern Steffel, the leader of the Whoopie John band in the later years. So music has played a huge part in McLeod County, and so I really wanted to tell this story. So why don't we get right to it? Then here goes. In the McLeod County History Museum, there's a plaque on the wall near the entrance to the West Wing that reads, "No power on earth has the ability to move people like the spirit of music." The quote was written by two Minnesota musicians, Vern and Alice Steffel, donors of the West Wing and the museum. Though they did not hail from McLeod County, their quote speaks volumes when it comes to this area's history. McLeod County's history of music begins in 1855 when three brothers of the famed Hutchinson Singers group decided to lay their roots along the edge of the big woods. Their first night in the county was spent in Glencoe, and as you may have guessed, they gave a free concert to the residents there. The following day, they set out for the site that would later bear their name, where they no doubt literally sang its praises. Though the Hutchinson brothers were the first famous singers of the area, they were by no means the only musicians around. Those early settlers, being humble and sturdy in nature, came from all parts of Europe and the United States, bringing key facets of their cultures and traditions along with them, and of course, music among them. Music was an important aspect of everyday life. Living on the frontier could be tough and often monotonous. Settlers had none of the modern conveniences that we enjoy today. No television, no electricity, or no radios. Idle time was often spent playing and listening to music. Instruments on the frontier were basic. Since most settlers traveled by ox cart, their instruments had to be somewhat portable. A popular instrument of that time was a small push-button concertina, an instrument commonly referred to as a squeeze box. It was lightweight, portable, and a key instrument in a style of music that was fast gaining popularity in parts of Europe and the United States, polka music. Polka is said to have originated in Czechoslovakia, where the term was coined. According to the legend, the word polka means to dance in half, referring to the half tempo and the half step style of dance that accompanies the music. In Wisconsin, Minnesota, and the Dakotas, where German, Bavarian, and Czech immigrants arrived in droves, polka fast became the mainstream genre of music. Minnesota had become settled by 1900 and was changing fast. Over the next few decades, dance halls began being constructed across the state. These dance halls, of course, would need musicians and musical groups to perform, and the birth of the modern polka band began. The bands ranged from 3 to 12 people. Groups typically consisted of drums, horns such as trumpets, trombones, and tubas, woodwinds like clarinets and saxophones, and of course the mainstay of polka music, the accordion or concertina. The music typically included polkas, waltzes, and schottisches, each played with unique timing. By the 1920s and 1930s, Minnesota bands like Whoopie John and the Six Fat Dutchmen became household names as radios made it possible to broadcast their music in homes. It was at this same time that McLeod County began seeing its own rise of homegrown bands. A popular musician was Jerry Dostal, who formed an 8-piece band in the early 30s. The group did frequent radio broadcasts all over Minnesota, and in the 30s even played in the Dakotas and Iowa. Another popular group was the Litfin Brothers Orchestra of Winstead. Local musicians regularly played in ballrooms and dance halls such as the Lake Marion Ballroom, the Plamore Ballroom, Archway Club, Stewart's Community Hall, and many more. Nationwide, polka began to lose popularity with the younger crowd in the 1950s and 60s as rock and roll took over the mainstream music stations. Yet in McLeod County and other parts of the state, polka still held on to its popularity. Local musicians like Jerry Cadillac, a player in the original Whoopie John band, did their part to entertain crowds across the state. One popular McLeod County musician of the time was Broughton native Lester Schuft, who took his love for polka music all over Minnesota. An original member of Eddie's dance band, Schuft played often in New Ulm, played for New Ulm Polka Days, the Big Joe Polka Show, and even performed in front of the Metrodome prior to a Twins game. Another man with the same last name, Jerry Schuft, played in polka bands in the 1950s and carried his love of music with him for many years afterwards. A Brownton native, Jerry played in several bands and was lucky enough to tour the ballroom circuit of Minneapolis, St. Paul, as well as other regions of Minnesota. McLeod County musicians certainly did their part to entertain folks in and around Minnesota. One musician, Wally Pickle, literally jumped onto the scene and would go on to entertain America with his unique skill of playing two trumpets at once while bouncing on a pogo stick. Wally began his Wally and the Dill Pickles Orchestra in 1950. His act eventually received national attention, and Pickle was booked on The Tonight Show, The Mike Douglas Show, Bozo the Clown, and even The Al Harrington Show. Pickle eventually brought the act to the international stage and performed in Czechoslovakia, where he played three trumpets while jumping on a pogo stick to the tune of Roll Out the Barrel. Polka music has faded some through the years, but there is no doubt that it has cemented itself into the very core of McLeod County heritage. Today, musicians like Chuck Thiel, whose Jolly Ramblers have over a century's worth of history, continue to entertain crowds with the style of music that is, and always will be, part of the folk culture of Minnesota and McLeod County. To celebrate McLeod County's tradition of old-time music, the History Museum will be hosting Whoopie Fest, a polka event on Thursday, May 5th. Admission to the event is free. There will be live music played by Chuck Thiel, as well as German food and beer catered by the Blue Note from Winstead. In addition, there will be sausage made locally by the Brownton Meat Market. There will be a charge for the meal. Doors will open at 5:30 p.m. and music will begin at 6. There will also be free Alpine-style hats for the first guests to show up. As always, lederhosen will be optional. So that was the story about music in McLeod County. Like I said, great story. And that also leads into, at the end there, I talked a little bit about an event that's coming up. And so that leads into the event. So last year we had a grand opening event in spring, and it was very well attended, very well received. People just loved it. We had just opened up that new exhibit and wanted people to come in and take a look, so we had our big event for that. And then at the end of the year, we had a big Christmas event, and I've never seen people so excited about an event that we had. We had one person pulled me aside afterwards and just said, "That was awesome, you better do that every year." And I heard that from other people too, that they really hope we do this again next year. And so, we had two kind of really big, popular, very successful events, because they are fundraisers, and we did quite well on those two fundraising events. But we had these two kind of bookend events of the year that were so great, we decided that, let's try doing this every year. So every year moving forward, we're gonna try and have a big event in spring and a big event on Christmas or around Christmas time. So you can all look forward to that. But at any rate, going back to this spring event, we, as a board, and myself especially, have always wanted to do a big polka event, or like a umpapa, I like to call it. And so this year we decided we're going to do that. We've got Chuck Thiel and the Jolly Ramblers, and he's very popular, has a good following in the area. So he's going to be down there playing music. We have German-style sausages being twisted up by the Brownton Meat Market, and then we're having the Blue Note out of Winstead. They're going to be making those sausages from Brownton. They'll be preparing those, and then there's going to be sauerkraut, potato salad with it, and then we're also going to have them serve beer as well. And so it should be a great night. We're making these kind of little alpine hats, with a feather in it for people when they come in, just to kind of add something to the event. So if you come, you're expected to wear that. But at any rate, we're hoping for a great polka style, like Mayfest sort of event. And since we have this Whoopie John thing going on down at the museum still, we're just calling it Whoopie Fest. But hopefully this can be a great event and be carried on for next year and years to come. So definitely come down for it. It's on Thursday, May 5th. The doors will open at 5:30 p.m. and The Chuck Thiel is going to start playing at about 6 p.m. and should go till 8. There's admission is free. You don't have to pay to get in. There will be a charge for the food and beverage, of course, as that's part of the fundraiser. But at any rate, I really hope to see a great turnout for that event. Lastly, I just wanted to talk about the newsletter or the magazine that comes out. We're still experiencing some major delays with the post office. I know it's getting on towards the end of the month now. Some people haven't even received it. If you would like to get it faster, you can switch over to an email version. The email version gets sent out on the first of the month, every single month, and everybody gets it right away. But the last few months, we've really been having issues, or the last few issues of the magazine, we've really been having problems just getting them out there on time. We get them sent to the printer, and they get them sent in the mail right away, but it's taking 2 weeks or more to get delivered to people around. So if you're experiencing that, I apologize. Hopefully we can see this fixed soon, and you can start getting those newsletters in your hand right away. But other than that, that is all the big stuff I've got for you now this month. Tune in again next month. We'll have some more stories, some more news, and hopefully I can we talk some more about this big event coming up. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you next month.